Joining me at the Jaipur Literature Festival, Pico Iyer, world traveler, great chronicler of that world, novelist, essayist, and also, in his latest book, a kind of memoirist. Pico, absolutely delighted to have you, but let me start with The Person Within My Head, your latest book. It's a kind of remarkable journey through both mind and memory of what you call a counterfather, a person or two people who shadowed you throughout your life. And unexpectedly, fascinatingly, the first is the English novelist, Graham Greene, who you never actually met, but you established all kinds of umbilical cords with. How did that happen?
Well, I think we all have these figures in our heads. It could be a painter or an actor or somebody out of history or fiction. We somehow feel a mysterious connection with them. And we feel that they know us better than our own friends and family do. And I actually think that's almost what reading is and writing is about, that a reader descends for 8 or 10 hours into a writer's head. And if the writer descends deeply enough into his own being and into the characters he creates, the reader comes to know that writer's secrets, his terrors, his guilt, his sins, as you will never know those of your parents, you hope, or even of your spouse. And you develop a strange closeness with an unmet stranger. And I think all of us have this relation with many people, and I have many writers inside my head. But certainly, as you say, Graham Greene is one of them. And he speaks for the sort of shadowy part.
A single book, a single novel by Graham Greene set you off at an early age, The Quiet American, set in Vietnam. And you know, it's a novel that you read again and again, and it's sort of never left your bedside, as it were.
Yes.
How did that trigger off this very long exploration of Greene, in whom you really see a kind of counterfather?
I do, yes, or a shadow. I think it was when I first began to travel, and I think many people have the sensation, as soon as you're alone in a hotel room in a foreign country, you don't know right from left, you don't know right from wrong, revolution is taking place in the streets outside, the one friend and companion you have is Graham Greene. And as you say, his book about Vietnam in the 50s, The Quiet American, to me, part of the beauty of that is it tells this elaborate political allegory, really, about the British Empire on its way out and the new American empire determined to reform the world, whether the world wants it or not, and Asia kind of wavering between them. But it also tells this very moving private story about 3 individuals living and breathing and kind of wavering between realism and romance. So you're right, I read it every 6 months for the last 20 years. It keeps changing as I keep changing, and it's become my secular Bible, I suppose, because I think one thing I look for in Greene is a moral life. I feel that he looked at the world really rigorously and tried to think how you would respond with conscience to the confusions of the world. And so I, stumbling through it, looked to him as a kind of alternative conscience.
Right. Many coincidences occur between Graham Greene's life, his church, indeed, your own in The Person Within My Head. But what's also fascinating is that from adopting Greene as a shadowy counterfather, you really explore your own relationship with your own father, don't you? Yes. There are these two men like bookending a life in between.
Absolutely, exactly. Because I think when I began the book, The Man Within My Head, I was sure that that man was Graham Greene. But as I began thinking about why do we create, as you said so wonderfully, these shadowy counterfathers, in response to the fathers who literally created us, of course, I did begin to think more and more of my own father. And then I began to think, as you were suggesting, that he was, in fact, the man within my head. And I don't write very much about the particulars of my father or my relation with him in my book. But I do think there's something archetypal between most men and their fathers. When we're growing up, and you may well have been the same, when you're 15 years old, you feel that to define yourself, to make your way in the world, means running in the opposite direction, away from your father, maybe towards Graham Greene, and doing everything the opposite, so that you are Sunil and not just the son of Mr. Sethi. And then 30 years on, you look in the mirror or you hear your own voice and you realize you've become your father. You rebel against your parents until you turn into them. And so I'm interested in that kind of pattern that I think most of us can relate to, that women, I think, with their mothers. And there's also this interesting double standard. I was thinking as I was writing the book, if I met a young woman and I said, "You're just like Virginia Woolf," or Sylvia, oh, she'd say, "Wonderful, I've been waiting my whole life for somebody to say that." If I said to her, "You're just like your mother," even if that mother was more attractive, talented, and brilliant than Virginia Woolf, she would recoil. And it's curious how we don't want to define ourselves in terms of our parents. we're keen to define ourselves in terms of these unmet strangers. And yet that itself is maybe a bit of a deception, because we are our parents, essentially.
Right, we are our parents. But let's talk about Pico Iyer, the traveler. You began traveling at an early age, working on cheap, quick fix introductions and guides. You know, how to do this country and that on $5 a day, and you worked your way around many countries in the world. But that became a more intense, curious search when you began your career as a journalist, and you developed a great propensity and love of really going to very remote, odd, difficult places.
Yes.
You once said that all of us travel to get away from ourselves, but also to discover ourselves.
Yes.
How deep was that impetus, and how and where did it really come to life in the many, many places you describe in your travel books, from Video Night in Kathmandu to the Global Soul? How did that burning intensity to discover, to leave yourself and find yourself come together?
Well, I think the roots of it were all in that commute I made as a little boy, when every time I left England to return to my parents, in some ways I was leaving myself, in some ways I was finding myself. And I think that was my training in realizing that no part of myself belonged to a single place, that I belonged to the commute between those places, or the dialogue, the conspiracy between England and California. And I think that upbringing has meant that I've never wanted to be rooted in any category or faith or civilization, but always been interested in bringing two places together and seeing what sparks they throw off. And when it comes to somebody like Graham Greene, who is called himself a Catholic agnostic, very Englishman, always in flight from England, a seeming skeptic who had this deep sense of romanticism. What I see in him is a restlessness. He never wanted to remain fixed in any community or category, and I guess that's exactly what I have been. And so I think that early commute really made me see that I couldn't align myself with England or with California or even with India, but was fascinated by the ways they projected their various hopes and dreams upon one another. And I think to this day, as you know better than I, if you meet a Californian in India, her notion of India doesn't begin to correspond to the place that you know, and an Indian's notion of California may not either. But there's something really interesting in the ideas that we construct, because they sustain us in different ways.
From Easter Island to La Paz in Bolivia, in the end, your affinity to Buddhism, Dalai Lama, chasing and investigating shadow fathers, the English novelist Graham Greene, your own remarkable parents, this world that you traverse, and you are centered at the end point of the Buddhist trail in the great town of Nara. How would you define the values or the people who really shaped you?
Well, I have learned a huge amount from now 40 years spent listening and talking to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And actually, as you say, my book immediately before The Man Within My Head was about him, but I see him and Graham Greene as really addressing the same question from opposite angles, which is how to find clarity and direction in a world of confusion. And what really impresses me about the Dalai Lama, and I think about the Buddhist tradition generally, is it's super realistic. It really looks closely, almost scientifically, at the world to see what it is, and then to see what can be made out of it. And Graham Greene, coming at fate through the back door, really is about possibility also. So as you know from reading him, his main character is usually a fallen whiskey priest who's drunk, and his father's a baby, and is doing everything wrong. And then in the middle of a moment of crisis, he rises to a kindness and selflessness and heroism that would put many a cardinal to shame. And so really I think my book on the Dalai Lama and my book on Graham Greene, although apparently about Buddhism and Catholicism, are really about this human question of how to rise to our potential, and how, while accepting our imperfections and fallenness, not to be hostage to them, or not to give up our sense of possibility.
To seek clarity and direction in a world of confusion. Pico Iyer, on those wonderful words, I thank you for joining me today at the Jaipur Literature Festival, and all the very best for The Person Within My Head and your future writing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for reading the book so closely and listening so carefully. I appreciate it.